Hello, welcome back to Al Talks. This is episode number 11. Um, I was gonna make a short little video about Bill Hicks this week, but I thought I'd actually put it into this episode. I don't actually remember why Bill Hicks came into my mind. I was browsing stand up on YouTube and kind of brain fart. Yeah, he just came into my mind. I did think it was mentioned in a podcast I've listened to this week, but I think I've mentioned Hicks before. In a podcast. Oh, actually, I remember now why. I watched the King of Staten Island. Yeah, so Bill Hicks came into my head because I watched the King of Staten Island with it's a movie with Bill Burr and Judd Apatow. It's loosely based on Jude's life. Was Jude's father was a fireman who was killed. It's the movie. I waited for a long time to actually watch it. Finally had the time there and I watched it. It's a great movie, so I highly recommend it. But the reason I got to think about Hicks is because I think Bill Burr. A lot of people say, "Oh, this comedian is like this comedian." A lot of people compare Eddie Murphy and Dave Chappelle to Richard Pryor. But obviously, there's huge differences. But I think Bill Burr embodies the comedy style that Hicks had, and the kind of crazy, outlandish, in your face. Like, because Bill Burr will just he the reason I like him is because he's not afraid to push the boundaries. You know, to him, it's the way he goes about joke writing. It's really unique. You've heard me say this a lot on the podcast, but it really is. I thoroughly enjoy. Like, Bill Burr is the type of person who has no problems doing, like, his podcast that he does on Monday is just him talking on his own for most of the time, well over an hour, and he can do that because he has guests in other podcasts he does with other people, like Bill Burtcast, which is the one he does with Bert Kreischer. But I mean, he's well capable of going on about a topic because he rants. But the rants are so, like, the the structure in those rants is great, and it's really interesting to watch those. I mean, he really is a great comic. Um, so that's the little bit about, but where this goes back to Hicks. A lot of Hicks's stand up, if not all of it, is on YouTube. You can watch it all there. But I mean, it's like Hicks was part of the Houston Outlaws. A group of, they didn't give themselves that title. That's what people started calling them. There's a group of four out. The comics, they call them the Outlaws because much like the Outlaws back in the Wild West days, they were rogue, they were crazy. Their comedy was different. They weren't afraid to push boundaries, which is why I think Bill Burr is a lot like Hicks. But yeah, it's quite tragic that Hicks died at such a young age. I think it was 32. He died from cancer, from smoking, which he always said on stage, because the people always used to give out to him for smoking on stage, much like to give out to Chappelle for smoking on stage, but Chappelle doesn't really care. Same as Hicks, he didn't care. And he goes, Hicks always said, wouldn't it be funny if I died from lung cancer later on, and people that have to get their voice box removed, and or he'd have a big gaping hole in his throat, and then he said, I put the cigarettes in there and then I smoked them. Yeah, so it was quite tragic that he passed away, but I don't know. It is what it is, I suppose. Yeah. This week, because I've been listening to a lot of Ali Makovsky's podcast. Her podcast is called Rest in Bitch Face. And I noticed that she was on Bobby Lee's brother's podcast, Stevie Weeby. And I've been meaning to watch Stevie Weeby's podcast, but I've never got around to it. So it's like, since I'm watching or listening to Ali's, might as well watch this one or listen to it. So I clicked on there, listening, and Stevie Weeby, he's Bobby Lee's brother, but he's not a comic. He's not an entertainer. But just from that one episode, the amount of depth and knowledge that he has, because he said he opened up a couple of times for Bobby at a couple of nightclubs, not nightclubs, comedy clubs, and that's as far as he's dabbled in comedy. But I mean, his depth and knowledge of all the comics, and it was a really, really interesting episode. So yeah, I think in the future I'm going to be watching more of Stevie's podcast. But I mean, yeah, it was really good. I've seen so many of Ali's podcasts now at this stage. One podcast I don't think I've mentioned that I watched this week was it's Ryan Sickler's Honeydew podcast. What Ryan Sickler's doing, with Joey Diaz at least, he's chronicling Joey Diaz's life through several episodes on the Honeydew, from Joey's earliest memories to present day. And I think they're up. The last episode that was released there, it was this week, I think. Yeah, that I watched. Well, it'll be when this video comes out. It'll be last week, but anyway, because I record them ahead of time. I'm talking from the past. So yeah, they chronicled. I think they're up to 1983 or 5 at this stage. Basically when Joey started his comedy career. He went through a divorce and then he got into comedy after he was released from prison. And it was, he was talking about how he, because Joey Diaz robbed people and everything else, he was telling how he, to fund his comedy career, he was robbing drug dealers, and they would dress up as policemen and go around and rob people, drug dealers, and then one time this guy didn't believe them and he started shooting, and it's all crazy stories, but it's it's a really good episode. So if you're interested, definitely check it out. It's Ryan Sickler on the Honeydew. What else? Yeah, I also listened to Whitney Cummins' podcast. I think it's called Good For You, with Danielle Rawlings. I think I might have mentioned Danielle Rawlings in really early episodes. I'll have a look. Yeah, I must have mentioned him, even if just in passing. Daniel is a really good comic. He works a lot with Dave Chappelle. During last summer, they were in Yellowstone Park, where they were doing shows. They created a comedy bubble to isolate themselves from, and they let people come and see them do stand up. I actually watched I think it was like a 20-minute stand up set that Chappelle did kind of towards the start of the summer. It was about George Floyd, when George Floyd was killed by the policeman. And he mentioned it. He came up on stage and said, I it wasn't it wasn't more of a stand up set. It was just Dave was giving his opinion about what had happened. And his shock and outrage at that event. But during the set, he was like, I have no problem telling dick jokes, but I have to talk about this. The reason I want to bring up that Good For You podcast with Whitney Cummings is because they went into how the Chappelle Show was aired on HBO Max and Netflix without Dave's permission, and they weren't going to pay him. So Dave actually did another stand-up set where he called them out, and he basically he said, he pitched the Chappelle Show to HBO, and HBO said, why would we need you? And then especially said, well, if you don't need me, why are you using my show without paying me? And Daniel went into how, he got Netflix actually very quickly took the Chappelle Show down. It's up there now because they're actually going to pay him. That's why he said he likes working with Netflix, because they asked him. And they took it down, not because it might be backlash, because Netflix didn't see it as a professional courtesy to Dave to have that up there without his express permission, which is what, which is, I suppose, not to stay away from all the business end of it. Really, how would I put it? I don't know. It's just not even a courtesy. It's he's Dave Chappelle. Like he mentioned, he was 29 when he signed those contracts for the Chappelle Show. He was broke. He had debt. He needed the money, so whatever, they decided. But HBO eventually took it down, and in the podcast, Daniel Rollins was like, he was talking to Chappelle, and Chappelle got off the phone. He's like, I got him, I'm getting the money, And it wasn't really more about the money. It's the fact that when before he became really famous for doing the Chappelle Show, he asked them, he pitched the show to them, and they refused. So it was for him, I'm sure it was a very gratifying moment, because he walked away from the Chappelle Show and he moved to Africa because of the way they treated him. Like he went away from comedy for 13 years and he came back, and it was like he never went to 13 years, and he it didn't skip any beats. He just came back, and he's still Dave Chappelle. He's doing great stuff. So what else are we going to talk about? No, I think that's it. And I think that's it for this week's episode. There isn't anything else I want to add. In terms of short videos, I don't know. Like I said, I was going to do the Hicks as a short video, but that didn't happen because it's in this episode. Work was a bit hectic last week, so another St. Patrick's Day in quarantine. Well, now in quarantine and lockdown, so that was, we're still experiencing this COVID, but hopefully things get better now with the vaccine rollout. But yeah, I think that's it for this week's episode. I have a bit more time this week. Just once again, I'm recording ahead of time, so this by the time this come out this week, try and figure out a bit more stuff in the background, and work on the channel a little bit more. See how that goes. But yeah, that's it for this episode. Stay tuned. In the following weeks, we'll have more content up. Hopefully guests, since I figured Zoom out. And yeah, I'll keep you all updated on any changes and what the Facebook page, which I have linked down below. Okay, thank you. See you all next week.